Charley Boorman and Ewan McGregor are back on our screens with a new series called Long Way Home that sees them swap their GSs for something a little more soulful. So to mark the premiere of the new show on Apple TV Plus on May the 9th, I was extremely fortunate to be able to go to Charley's house and take a look at this beautiful, tastefully customized BMW R75, and he even let me take it out for a quick spin.
The first thing I wanted to ask is, what made you choose, would you call it a classic?
Yeah,
an old bike, let's say.
Depends on how old you are, I think. I was sitting with my father the other day, he's 92, and I was sitting having lunch with him yesterday, and we were talking about age. I was looking at him, and he was 92, and I'm thinking, fuck, you're old. And then I realised that it wasn't that long ago that when he was 50, and I was sitting there thinking, anyway, that's another story. Sorry, we'll move on.
That's okay.
No, I suppose it is a classic, but I don't think you and I ever really thought about, whether or not it was a sort of classic. When we did Long Way Up with the electric bikes, we loved it, and it was a real challenge, but it was really a real challenge, and everyone said that it was impossible to do, and you're never going to make it and stuff like that, and so that kind of made us do it more. But because you had to charge every night, it was restricting, so you couldn't just pull off the road and camp and do what we normally do. And so when we came to the end of that one, you always start talking about another trip. Right. So that it makes it easy to finish the one you're on. You go, well, we can finish this because there's another one, and we started talking about a classic bike and something nearer home. And Ewan he owns the Moto Guzzi police bike, and he's owned it for about 10-15 years. So I needed to buy a bike that was similar age.
So I was going to ask that as well. Is this, I guess then, wasn't in your collection, so where did you get it from?
I hunted around. I had a real struggle to find something I really wanted to ride. I was looking at a whole load of Ducatis, but back in those days, in mid-70s, which is what Ewan's is, his is 74. So in the mid-70s, they were a lot more sort of sporty, the Ducatis, and being Italian. So and then I saw this one, and a guy called Kevin from Kevil's Speed Shop down south, he'd built it for someone else. So I approached him and I said, look, this is beautiful, would the other guy be prepared to sell it? And he was, but he came back in a bit of a state. But Kevin, he's done the beautiful.
He's amazing,
because this first half is all more or less original, R75 and then this back bit he got rid of all. It's quite heavy, the R75s, with the mudguards, and the big a bit of a fat bum. It's not
built up at the back there.
Built up at the back, so he kind of stripped it down. So there's this slight kind of retro kind of look. So
is this how it was when you got it from Kevil's, or have you made some changes? Because as I've noticed from the other bikes in your garage, it's a bit of a signature paint job, for example. Was this added on?
Yeah, the orange was added on. And the guy who does the paint jobs, he's done all the other ones as well. Right. And each time I do a different bike, he does a different coloured stripe. And so he said, we're going to do this one. He said, but I've got a root beer colour. Oh. And root beer is my favourite drink, soda of all time. And I said, yes, absolutely. So he painted it out.
That's a nice touch.
The seats were original. We had to build a frame for the panniers.
Right.
And we had soft panniers from Touratech. And that was it, really. These look like Firestones, but they're not. They're called Fuckstones.
Yeah.
And they actually say it on the sidewall. So.
And how were they? They look quite square and not that grippy.
Not that grippy, no. But you know what's funny? So people always ask us, you must have learnt a lot going on your trips. And you and I go, we haven't really learnt very much at all, really. But the classic was that we left Ewan's house in jeans and open face helmet and all the appropriate stuff for this type of bike.
Yeah.
Got to the end of his road and it started to rain, and we had to put all our waterproofs on, and we didn't take them off for about 4.5 weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well about the bike. I mean, it looks fantastic. So certainly the aesthetic side of things is covered off, but how much did you change functionally about it to make it more appropriate for the trip, or did you just decide to ride it in a fairly sort of stripped back form? Yeah,
it's pretty much as is. This has been modernised slightly, so the points have been taken out, and it's electronic now. So which makes sense. Ewan's still had the points on his, other than just tidying it up and putting the pannier things on the back. I didn't do anything to it, really. If I was ever to do anything, I would see if I could convert it and have a little disc on the front.
Disc brake?
Yeah, because drum brakes, modern vehicles stop very fast now. And if you have an old bike with drum brakes, I've got an old '59 Triumph.
Right.
Back then, that has a tiny little drum brake, and the amount of times I've ended up beside a car, sort of nodding at this car because I've had to
swerve rather than
stop. You know.
I've noticed you've got heated grips though.
Yeah.
And what's this little?
I put those on. Oh, so the heated grips I put on, absolute must.
The Oxford hot grips, are
Oxford
they?
hot grips, yeah. And I mean, when I was doing enduros, I was training to do the Dakar Rally back in 2006, and on my enduro bike I put heated grips on.
Right.
And the roasting I got from all the other competitors, you know, and then a month later, I suddenly started seeing all these enduro guys who suddenly all had heated grips. This was for the Senna, and the Senna has a little camera on it, so you could turn the camera on and off on that. And then, you know, the must-have quad lock vibration dampener thing with the wireless charger, so that, you know, when it's raining and stuff, the cables don't get wet. So that's brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, we have those on all our bikes as well.
I always undo them, and then when I'm off going somewhere to ride a bike somewhere else, I just take it all with me.
Take it, yeah. I stick it in a bag quite often as well.
Now, I should probably add at this stage that Quadlock are both sponsors of this channel and, I believe, Charley, and so a huge thanks to them for supporting us and making videos like this one possible. I genuinely believe they're the best motorcycle phone mounts in the business, and so I'll leave a link in the description below to a full rundown of their product lineup that we shot earlier this year, as well as a link to their website so you can pick up your own.
I also saw recently, a series you did on YouTube with Touratech where you took the 1300 GS, and I was really interested just to think that you probably must have shot those at a roughly similar time than the trip with this bike?
It was straight after this one. When we first did Long Way Round, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen, but the Touratech had this big catalogue, and it was a big book. 21 years ago, it was always sitting in my toilet, you know. So when I sat on the toilet, I would thumb through this catalogue. They had everything in it. I mean, it was like biker porn.
Yeah.
And then when you and I did Long Way Round, we got in contact with them, and they were super supportive with the, because it has those classic aluminium panniers that you always see with the adventure bikes, and everything else, camping, you name it, they kind of did it. So sort of 20 years later, they approached me to do some work with them, and we went to Thailand on the 1300. It was good fun. We're going up through rivers and massive river crossings. I mean, it was really, really good fun.
I was quite interested to hear your thoughts on the bike because, you know, doing what we do where we cover the news and review them, it's certainly been something that sparked a lot of conversation with the way it looks, with the way they've slimmed it down. So from someone who's done some substantial trips on many generations of Boxer, how did it feel, and what did you make of some of the changes they made?
I think it's brilliant. You know, I think for the front end with the new look, I think it's a bit of Marmite. Yeah. Some people like it, some people don't. In a year's time or so, I think people would, a bit like the Range Rover when it first changed. No one liked it, now everyone loves it. So I think it's a bit like that. But what they've done with the front end, they've completely changed. So I don't know if a lot of people know, but on the GS, the 1200, 1100, 1300, the forks are here, but because of the Telemart system, the front forks are pivoted. Yeah. So they're attached to a ball, so they move back and forward. So it has to have a certain setup. They've completely changed that, and they've changed the way that works, which means they can have much bigger front forks, which gives you much more feel. And then because of the frame now, that gives the bike a lot of rigidity. You can especially feel it when you're on the tarmac going around the twisties. You feel it's much more planted. You get much more feedback off the bike, and it feels really nice. And then on the dirt as well, the one thing the 1200 and the 1250 had was that it would hold, and then suddenly it was gone. You know, it didn't give you a feedback. Whereas the 13, when you're pushing it off road, you can feel it much more, so you have a much more control. So in that regard, I think it's extraordinary, and it's better balanced. It still has that Boxer engine, that low down grunt that's just extraordinary. So it's a good bike. Yeah,
I enjoyed it as well. I wondered though, from your perspective, whether you feel like the bike can almost become too qualified for the job, and does that kind of take away from the trip in some ways, or can you just enjoy it in another way?
I think when you have all this technology, so someone told me once, if Scott of the Antarctic, if Scott had a GPS, he'd probably have taken it. Yeah. And so, you know, I think you just take the best of whatever is there at the moment. You take it with you. And I think I think with all the electronics on the bike and everything, I think it makes someone who's not confident on a bike much safer. Yeah. And then if you're a good rider, you can really use the electronics to your benefit.
What about from your personal perspective? Because we were talking earlier about vans just before we got going filming, and you mentioned that active cruise control, for example, is something you feel like you would always spec now on a four-wheeled vehicle, let's say. Do you feel the same about bikes as well? Because obviously that's an option on the GS. Would that be something you'd use? And adaptive ride height and electronic suspension and blind spot warnings, are they of interest, or do you find yourself just getting on a bike like that and switching it off and set and forget with the riding modes?
I mean, the advantage is you can turn all that off if you want to. I'm a big fan of adaptive cruise control, and I've ridden a lot of bikes now which have it. And when you're out on the open road and you're doing a long mileage, that adaptive cruise control just gives you, it just makes that long mileage easier. And you can go that 20% longer. And so I like it. And then when a little blind spot, someone comes up behind you on your little blind spot, little light saying someone's there. It's funny, when I was in Italy doing some filming for Ducati, I was a factory rider, just for a day, not really, but and we're doing it, and they were filming, and a bike was coming up close beside me, and so without having to make sure to keep to where he was, I could see the little blind spot light was coming on, so I knew where he was.
It's a nudge, isn't it?
So it's a nudge. Yeah. I think it's great. I like all that stuff. So, but then getting on this, going off on a day like this, going off to, now I've got a local pub down the road here, which is just a delightful place. I could, take this. Yeah.
I guess then, thinking about having ridden this on the trip and the 1150s, the 1200s, the 1300, and tried them all, I guess, where do you think it peaked then? Is the latest then the best, or was the best experience you had on the oldest bike, or somewhere in the middle where there was a sweet spot in terms of how capable it was, but still you had to ride around some of its flaws?
Yeah, I mean, I loved riding it. I mean, on this trip with Ewan, when we headed off on these old bikes, there was something really nice about it. Your pace changes, your attitude changes, because it's not, it's different, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's been sort of 20 years now, and I hadn't realised how much I'd missed riding with Ewan. I think one of the great things about this relationship that Ewan and I have is this ease of dropping onto bikes and just riding off together. And I think riding on these old bikes was fantastic. I still think about the 1150 that we did a long way round. That's still a bike. I jumped on one of those the other day, and oh my God, that's big and heavy.
Oh, right.
Huge as well. I mean, very nostalgic. I loved riding it. Claudio still has his one,
right,
from Long Way Round, and he still rides it. So we were in Switzerland on this last trip with Ewan, and Ewan and I were riding the 1150, which was from the TV show, and it was lovely. I mean, that thing can still twist around the corners. It's incredible. So. Yeah, I think they're all good. I think you need a bike for every mood. If you had the space, you would wake up and think, what am I feeling today? And then get on that bike.
What's the formula? Isn't it N+1 is the ideal amount of bikes to own, where N is the number you already own? I wondered if we could just start it up as well.
Yeah, for sure. Have you seen the key? That's the key.
That's not standard, is it?
Yeah.
On this, is it really?
Yeah, that's standard. So it just goes in. Yeah, it just goes in there.
Far cry from the keyless.
That's one of those side stands that flick up.
Oh, like the Harleys.
Nightmare. Yeah, that's a nightmare. So let's see if we can get this puppy going. Okay. Oh, there we go. There we go. Lovely. It's got that lovely boxer shake, doesn't it? And the older ones, when you rev it, it twists, it pulls you over.
Yeah.
It's like when you're popping wheelies on the 1150, you would as you pop wheelies on the 1150, it would always tug you over. Take it for a spin.
Oh, tempted.
Well, this is certainly something a little different to what I'm normally used to riding, and
Yeah, it might take a little moment to adjust, firstly to the braking power or lack thereof that Charlie was just talking about, and also to how much gas you have to give it. Yesterday I was riding a 90 horsepower adventure bike, and so perhaps this doesn't quite have the same level of G-force, but despite not being super powerful, it's got a real charm to it. There's a very nice sound at the exhaust, which perhaps makes me appreciate why some people are a fan of the Boxer sound. I think on the more recent Boxer twins, you know, with emissions regulations and stuff, the sound does become quite stifled and maybe sounds a bit flat. But on an older air-cooled engine like this, with a fairly free-flowing set of pipes, it does sound really rather good. Oh, I don't really want to turn around and go back, to be honest. I suppose I probably should. I'm actually pleasantly surprised though by the handling. It feels quite easy to ride. I guess the centre of mass is quite low with this engine, but mostly I'm just glad to slow down a bit so I can get back on the gas and hear that lovely sound. Now, would I want to ride around Europe for months on it though? It might not seem like the most obvious choice of adventure bike, but even after just a little short blast on it, I can see the appeal. How do you switch it off? How do you switch it off?
Push it down.
Ah.
Yeah.
Stall it.
Oh no, up. Sorry, up. There we go.
Oh.
So what did you think?
Well, I can see.
Now I'm here, he's going to have to be nice about it.
Obviously, it takes a little acclimatization to the brakes.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily fast, but it has such a great sound to it. It sort of gives you a big grin every time you just get on the gas. I can see now why people like that sound, because it sounds more raw with less interfering with the fundamental sound of it. So.
And you're riding along. You're riding along at a very different pace. It's not a modern bike. So you're riding around. It's a different vibe, you know. So.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. Brilliant.
Oh yeah.
Once again, a massive thanks to Charlie for being so kind as to host us and for taking the time to tell us about the bike on the new show. Like I say, it's out on May the 9th, so do head over to Apple TV Plus if it sounds like your cup of tea, which if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure it will be. In the meantime, do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news and reviews right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.